Apparently it's not that great. I don't know.
You say the word and we will pour.
Is that even a thing?
I don't give a crap.
Yeah, definitely one thing we struggle with is stopping the episode.
All right. So thanks for joining us, Brian.
Do you prefer Brian or Bry, or do you care?
Both work. Both work. The reason why I go by Bry is there was another Brian in my high school class, and I didn't like that.
Right.
So I tried to change myself.
There you go.
I call myself Bry instead.
I was Joe most of my childhood, and then I married my wife's American, but her family, American-Italian family, and they don't like to get creative with names. So like I have 2 nephews named Joe, my father-in-law's named Joe, my brother-in-law's named Joe. So I stopped being Joe officially when I married into that family. I was like, I can't go by Joe anymore.
Just lost in the masses of Joes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Which is great. Now when people call me Joe, it's weird, but yeah. Cool. Well, that's irrelevant. So we're joined by you today. And really, we just kind of want to hang out and have a dram because you are professionally, you're a brand ambassador, but you are also a self-admitted, so I don't feel too bad saying this, a whiskey nerd.
That's right. That's right. I seen the face. I seen your face there. Like, is that okay to say? I'm like, that's 100% okay to say.
Yeah. It's a compliment. I mean it as a compliment. But you're a whiskey nerd, and today we want to talk to you, the whiskey nerd / enthusiast of whiskey. And so let's start with this, which this kind of is going to cross boundaries for sure, which isn't a bad thing, but we're drinking Ardbeg Glenmorangie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. What do you think about this whiskey?
Well, like I am a bit biased, as you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
think it's very good. Yeah. If you want me to be quite honest about it, when I first got the job with Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, of the Ardbeg core range, this is the one that I didn't like as much as the others.
Yeah.
And it was actually maybe about a year into the job, it just kind of clicked. And I think sometimes you get that with whiskey. Maybe it's because they're paying me. I don't know. But I think it is 100% just whiskeys click at some point, and then it becomes like a different experience for you. Yeah. So even the batches have changed, which they may have, but I think it's more myself, my palate's more adapted to it now.
What put you off about it?
I think it's the intensity. I think I'm not scared of having a high ABV whiskey. But balance is always a thing I always look for in a whiskey. Not to be too nerdy. But it's interesting with Corey Vrecken. I think initially I was thinking that, whoa, that's like, do I need to leave it with some air around it first? Do I have to add water? And a lot of times when I was just getting to know these different whiskies, I didn't really have the patience to do that.
Yeah.
Like the idea of going through the ABC of how you're meant to drink a whiskey. And because the 10-year-old and the Anno and the Uigeadail, which was the core range at the time, like those, Uigeadail was my favorite whiskey, like full stop.
Yeah.
And the 10-year-old was the first Ardbeg I tried. I tried that when I was out camping or hiking, I should say, not camping. And the Anno, I've got this absolute obsession with some of the flavors there. And Corey Vrecken just like went to the side. And I think it was maybe later on, actually seeing how different it is to the rest of the core range. That's when I fell in love with it then.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it hooked me right away, and I was half anticipating to like the Uigeadail more, just based on reviewers saying like, hey, it's a little less of a price, but a lot of people just saying liked it more. It was quickly one of mine until the Lefroy Glore took it over when I tried that. You bought a bottle of that, and I was like, I think this is better.
Well, it tastes even better when you don't have to pay for it.
Exactly. Everything. Maybe that was the difference. You know what? Let's chalk it up to that. I didn't have to pay for it. It was his bottle. But I still love the Uigeadail, and I've been saving, like I have like this much left in my bottle, and it's one of those ones. As soon as it's gone, my wife better not listen to this. As soon as it's gone, I'm gonna go get another bottle, because it's one I think I always want to have around. But yeah, it's a great whiskey. But I thought the Corey Vrecken was exceptional. I think I favored it more over the Uigeadail, but we've never AB'd. So
no, we haven't. No,
I don't know. I guess there's only one real way to find out.
That's true.
Well, I think if a lot of times I've been interviewed and whiskey tastings, people will say like what your favorite Ardbeg is, and Uigeadail has always been the answer. But it's so strange. Like I think that if you ask me probably in 6 months' time, I think I might say Corey. I'm not sure. So things do change.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely my palate. The whiskey has changed a little bit, like, because there's always going to be some sort of batch variance. But yeah, I think it's my palate that's changed, because I absolutely love it now.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you see that progression happening, or how do you maybe I think perceive that? Because it's something we've talked a lot about, is just we have these moments, right? Tin Cup was the most notable one, where we had Tin Cup. We were like, this is disgusting. I hate this whiskey. Yeah. And then you like snuck it in one night.
I didn't do it on purpose.
What? Yeah. Okay. But you ended up giving it to me, and he just leans over and he's like, do you think our palates have expanded in the last, I don't know what you said, like in the last few months or whatever? And I was like 100% they have. Like, I like things I never thought I would like. And anyway, and then you're like, yeah, this is the Tin Cup.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever seen that with that.
I've tried that one. Yeah.
American whiskey. Yeah. But the first time we had it, we
I hated it.
Oh, it was, and we were like, I think we were drinking it next to other whiskeys, but even still, like, we drank it. We were like, this is like horrible.
Same thing with 40 Creek Copper Pot.
Yeah.
We love that whiskey now. It's great. So how do you, what do you think about that process and how our palate evolves, and how we, and maybe speaking into a little bit of like, how you challenge your own palate forward?
Yeah, I think it's, you have to take the blinkers off. I think sometimes it's like, don't judge the whiskey on what you see on the label, because as much as it seems like, oh, this is a whiskey matured in this barrel, therefore I should be getting these type of flavors. That, to me, I used to love that. I used to love the idea of, that's an unusual barrel. I can't wait to taste those flavors from the barrel. Yeah. Taking the blinkers off and just treating it as a nice whiskey. That, to me, is like what changed. So it's not as if you're trying to dissect what should be in there in theory. It kind of loses a little bit of the sparkle, because in terms of single malt Scotch whiskey, in my opinion, they're all good. And that makes it really hard when it comes to when you're a whiskey fan, because what happens when you get two good whiskeys side by side? And is it the idea, like, one's maybe not as exciting as the other, but maybe the one that's actually a little bit more rough around the edges is more interesting for you? So those kind of off notes, some of those more sulfuric flavors that maybe people will say is meant to be bad. Maybe after a time you've tried everything under the sun, and trying something that's got an off note, it's like, whoa, I've not tried that before. And that's exciting.
Yeah.
And I think it's with wine drinkers will probably say the same thing. And I was drinking a couple of glasses of wine last night. Riesling is my favorite, which is like the one that no one else likes. And it's like quite crushable. Another one was a Cabernet Franc Rosé. And the Riesling, in my head, like, I'm going to enjoy this more. And the Cabernet Franc had these unusual notes, like grilled courgette, and also like green pepper. And I walked away remembering the Cabernet Franc, and what I did, the actual one in theory, I actually enjoyed better, like the Riesling. And I think with whiskey, it's the same idea. It's those distinctive flavors that stand out a bit more with experienced whiskey drinkers.
Yeah, definitely. And if we ever ask a question that puts your job at jeopardy, you are allowed to say, I plead the fifth, even though that's not a thing in Canada. But as a whiskey ambassador that's obviously representing specific brands, how do you keep your palate? Like, I think it was Davin that like talked about what do you call it, cellar palate, where he was referencing the wine industry, and if all you're drinking is the wine you're selling, you think your wine is the best wine, and you think everything else isn't as good. So because your palate is just so accustomed to that, how as a brand ambassador are you able to maintain a pretty open and experienced palate, and not like get it really narrow into, like Ardbeg and Glenmorangie, and that's all I drink?
It's a great question. And I think when I was on the road a lot more, like, I think a lot of the time it was essentially like sometimes like 5 days on the road, and it's Glenmorangie and Ardbeg is all I'm going to be drinking in terms of whiskey.
Yeah.
And because even after I finished at work, like after having and talking about whiskey the whole day, the one thing I want is a pint, not another dram. So it's interesting is that I myself being very, very fortunate to be part of a couple of whiskey clubs. It means that, and the community part of it's still my favorite part of the whiskey world. The whiskey is fantastic, and the history and the process is all amazing, but the community is there. And when you're actually like getting to, crack open a bottle or two with some friends, and then you hear what they say about the whiskey right in front of you, and then that little spark of endorphins go through me. I'm like, oh my word, this is such an exciting thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's the idea of being open-minded to it is one thing, but actually you're having to like push yourself to actually go on the occasions where you get to drink different whiskies. And as you're talking about, like maybe whiskies that you have to revisit to kind of feel the love for, like I'm still open-minded to that. But if I was lazy about it, there's a good chance I would get that kind of exhaustion in me. And Glenmorangie and Ardbeg is all I would have.
Yeah. Well, and I think I heard somebody say that I might have been Ralphie, but maybe anyway, it was somebody said that when they're out, they don't drink whiskey at all. Like they really only drink whiskey as like work thing. And then whenever they're like leisure time or anything like that, they're drinking other stuff because like if they would just wreck their palate if they were drinking whiskey all the time. It might have even been Davin. I can't remember. Somebody said that who drinks a lot of whiskey for their job, right?
Yeah.
So it is kind of an interesting thing because like for us, we drink a lot of whiskey, but it's still like it's still all about the discovery and enjoyment. But even still, if we go out to a bar, the odds of us buying an ounce of whiskey or 2 ounces of whiskey is quite a bit lower than just having a pint or a wine or a cider or something like that.
Like I was talking to Jamie this morning and she was my wife, she was so relieved to hear me say, I think I need a break from alcohol. I was just sick for a few weeks and I didn't drink a lot during that period because I couldn't taste anything, or at least not very well on either end of that time. But I Thursday night we went out and I had a few beers, and then last night was over to dinner with some friends and we had a few bottles of wine between the three of us, and then Wednesday we did an episode where we drank a lot of whiskey, and then today we're drinking whiskey, and I'm just like, man, I could really just use to not drink alcohol. It'd be great to have some water.
It's so important though. Like, and I know for yourselves, it's not a case of like the excess consumption. It's a lot of just the curiosity. And it's almost, you don't want that unfortunate byproduct, in terms of what it's actually doing, but you have to be aware of it. And I think that taking breaks is one thing in terms of like when you're drinking quite a lot of whiskey in general, but alcohol. But I think also as well though, we're in a really good position now. Let's see when it comes to going out socially. There's a lot of offers there on low ABV drinks and sometimes zero alcohol drinks. Because a lot of people don't think the idea like, oh, you can't go out if you're not drinking. And thankfully now there's less pressure on someone doing that. And myself being a fan of beer, there's some fantastic zero ABV beers that are out there, and even now the spirits as well. So I think it's you can still go out and enjoy yourself even if you're not necessarily having a few drams at a pub.
Yeah, certainly. I had a question. We've never talked about this, but something you said a couple minutes ago. Well, we kind of talked about around this, but you mentioned like the in-person experience, cracking open a couple bottles with some friends, the in-person response that happens right in front of you. I even hate to mention it, but we're coming out of two years of like almost every interaction feels like you're on a computer. We're on a computer right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sounds like you would have some appreciation for the moments that whiskey creates. And on top of that, is there a discernible difference to you in, do you feel like it's extra special when you're in a room with people, you're drinking whiskey?
I think so, and not just when necessarily I'm hosting. I just mean like being around with friends and things like that.
Yeah,
there's a couple of my friends here, Dave and Dave. I only hang out with Daves, and
nice.
they came over. They came over to my apartment recently, and it's really cool because like as much as like we're the three of us are nerds, the one thing that we do like is when you're actually drinking a dram, and then you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to look at the bottle. It's just like this is a really nice experience, and then afterwards, it's like, oh, like what was that? What was those flavors? And as much as that you're trying to have normal conversation about real life, and we haven't seen each other in like 8 months, and you're trying to talk about, oh yeah, when's the wedding coming up? When's the next time you're going to be on the road? And before you know it, it just goes down this wormhole of 45 minutes talking about the difference between condensers at distilleries. and it's fun, but the actual raises is doesn't necessarily matter what whiskey you're actually having at a time necessarily. It's just a little bit of spark of conversation there. And I don't think you can beat that. And doing it online, I've since March 2020, the whiskey club that I'm a part of in Scotland, the Hip Flask Hiking Club have been doing a virtual Wednesday hangout since March 2020, and that's still going on. And that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I still think in person is where the magic happens.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. I want to ask because you mentioned, and I don't disagree with you, but you mentioned that you think all Scotch whiskey or all whiskey, I don't know. I don't remember if you said Scotch, but anyway, you said all single malt is good. Now, what I want to ask, is that do you think that there actually is a bad single malt? Because the reason why I'm asking is because I know that obviously you have Scottish roots, and I heard Jim McEwen say that there's an unspoken thing within Scotland that they never say anything bad about anybody else in the industry. So I wanted to see. I don't want to get any names, but I did want to hear, like, do you think there is bad single malt out there? Because somebody that is Scottish, Ralphie, would argue that
on the shelves out there, I think you're saying.
But or are you of the mindset that no, every Scotch is good, it just there's different aspects of it that are good?
I think I like the idea of Jim McEwen was saying there, because I think the reason you don't badmouth your competitors is you might be working for them one day, and that'll be very much in your face. But no, I think you can still have an opinion on it. I know, like, Jim's an absolute legend in the industry and will tell you his honest opinion on things. But I think there's also a respect towards what it takes to make a single malt Scotch whiskey, and how you try and make things that are to a certain quality consistently. And I know that for some whiskey nerds, that seems a bit boring. Consistency doesn't line up with creativity. Yeah. But when you're only working with the same raw ingredient of, like, malted barley, and you've got yeast and you've got water and you've got oak, like, if you've got that there, one of the things that I think is amazing is when you can either go towards the idea of getting more people to drink Scotch whiskey in the same way that we all learned how to do it, and the whiskies that we fell in love with, you're hoping that people will fall in love that way. So consistency is pretty good. The other thing as well, though, is the idea of experimenting and trying different techniques and maybe different barrels. And there's a lot more in that. It's not just about the barrels, there's more on that. And then that opens you up for risk that maybe it's not that great. Yeah. But what might not be necessarily well received at one point by everyone, later on might be on to actually become like a very interesting whiskey that people actually hold in high regard. But I think the fact that the Scotch Whisky Association has so many, like, strict laws in terms of how you can actually make it does give it that quality standpoint. And I think from there, we're actually at a decent level in terms of as far as spirits go, in terms of quality. Yeah. Not everyone's going to like every whiskey, I know that. But I think from a quality standpoint, compared to other spirit categories, at least we've actually got a line of quality we can have. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, we just talked about this yesterday. I think we were just talking about, how do we handle good or bad whiskeys? And I think we were talking about our podcast, because we were like, do we say, like, this is a bad whiskey if I don't like it? Where is that? How do you say a whiskey is bad? Because there is so much subjectivity. And I think, like, we both, well, what it boiled down to me was, like, at some point you just have to have confidence that there's a presupposition that if I say a whiskey is bad, it's bad to me, right? Like, I don't enjoy it. It's bad to me. So if we can all agree on that, I'm in that context, I may be allowed to say this whiskey's bad. And then we talked about regions, and you were like, well, what would a bad Scotch be to you? Like a bad single malt. And I was like, there's got to be one. There's definitely got to be one. Could not think of a single one. Like, in my history of trying whiskey, couldn't think of one at all.
You could think of ones that you were, like, maybe mad at because they're more expensive,
disappointing for how much you paid for them,
something like that. But you wouldn't necessarily be able to say, like, that was bad.
That was bad flavor. Like, I was really repulsed by that flavor. Having that experience.
I would say value is definitely something, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about myself, in terms of, like, ensuring that enough transparency within reason is given, so someone can actually purchase something. It's their hard-earned money, and they get to say something, whatever that says on the label is what they're getting. And I think we're doing a lot better on that in Scotch whisky than what we were before, for sure. But again, there's not every category has that, and I think that we're in an okay position. But I know myself that the value of something is something that you can't. what might not necessarily be a huge amount of money for some person. Like, I mean, I know myself that if I spend $100 on a bottle, I want something pretty decent.
Yeah.
You know, it's
yeah.
And I think that's maybe where it comes to, and I'm 100% agreement on that. Like, you get a good value single malt, can still be a good whiskey, can still be a good single malt, but maybe not necessarily the value adds up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's smart to lay out your lay some of that out before you go around just saying this whiskey is terrible and I hate it. Because those are two different statements, right? Like, this whiskey is terrible, I hate it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and we would say that we had a lot easier time thinking of bad Canadian and bourbons, like Canadian whiskey and bourbon, than we did like when we were thinking about Scotch. We're like, I don't know. Like,
that is tough. Yeah.
But when we were like Canadian, we're like, oh yeah, we know that there's some bad ones out there.
But then you have to factor in, given all that, because obviously you've got some big commercial brands, which with Scotch you would maybe pull in like blended whiskey and make that more of a comparison to Canadian whiskeys that are not super good, but they're very available all over the place and very popular and they sell a lot. But even with that, you have to factor in what we talked about just a few minutes ago, which is your palate expands. And so for us, we got into whiskey through Scotch primarily. I started into Irish for whatever reason, just because I liked some Irish musicians, and that happened to be Irish music, Irish whiskey, single malt Scotch. And then I was gone. I was into whiskey at that point. And so we've been drinking single malt Scotch a lot longer. I'm getting into Canadian a lot more now. Really excited about a lot of what Canada's producing, growing in my appreciation for bourbon. So Tin Cup which is not a bourbon, but an American whiskey. Tin Cup was bad, and now it's not so bad. And so when you're saying a whiskey is bad, it can be like, it should maybe be prefaced with, this whiskey is bad today to me. It's bad to me today. That doesn't mean it won't be good to me tomorrow. Yeah. It is really hard to find, this objective. I had a wine last night. Actually, you gave it to me.
Was it
was the one you gave. Don't buy that again. I had a wine last night. I was like, this is bad. Like, this tastes like something's wrong. Like, it was maybe just too old. Maybe it just didn't take to age well. But all of us agreed that I brought it to someone's house because everything was closed yesterday. I couldn't pick up a bottle of wine, so you lent me one.
But the real question is, did you say Tyler gave this to me, or did you say, sorry, I brought a bad wine?
I said Tyler brought it. Tyler gave this to me. I said I had no other option.
Yeah. Okay. You had no other option.
They were like, do you want to take the rest of that home with you? And I was like,
no, dump it.
You can keep it. We all thought it was a little funky. But yeah, haven't had that experience with whiskey. Before we get, maybe, because I feel like we're moving fast and loose right now, but I really would like to hear, we ask most people this, how'd you get into whiskey? And just hear a little bit of your story, how and why you like it so much, and how you ended up where you are today.
I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing for my role, but I'm probably one of the least underqualified brand ambassadors, I think, in the world. I didn't go to marketing school. I'm not a bartender. Didn't go to business school or anything. I just like whiskey, and that seems as if, like, well, oh my word, we're so jealous of you because that's all it took. And maybe the Scottish accent got me the job. I don't know, probably, but I think when I actually fell in love with whiskey, it's like I've always been like a total nerd about different things. Like, I found like one thing to focus on. I'm like, okay, this is my thing for the next few months. Be that video games. I'm a wrestling nerd as well. I know more about wrestling than what I do whiskey. I think I'm still going to be a DJ at one point. There's always sort of things I'm just like, okay, this is my thing. And I've had that since I was a kid. And the one thing that's interesting with whiskey, when I started drinking it in my early 20s, I was like, I think I can do this. I think I can actually enjoy a whiskey. And then I'm talking to my friends about it. I'm like, this is really cool. I'm now part of a little club. And now we're friends together about this one thing. And I never thought that actually be a drink out there like that. I thought drinking was more, you have a couple of pints in the pub, maybe you have like a glass of wine with dinner. The actual idea is a community around it. And that really sparked me towards the idea of this is bigger than just a drink. So I started a whiskey club along with my friend Graham, called the Hip Flask Hiking Club. I talk about it all the time. It's my favorite thing about Scotch whiskey is our wee club in Scotland, because it's like every time we're going out, it was like we were actually like experimenting together in terms of like what drinks we're going to be having. Yeah. I'm like, this is such a cool fascinating category. And we went over to Islay together. As soon as you step into a distillery, everything kind of makes sense. And as I went on, I thought, well, I didn't really have any intention of making money from this, because I didn't think people actually paid people to talk about whiskey. And over the years, I've learned a lot in terms of like self-learning about the process of making whiskey, about the history of whiskey. I'm still a big part of the whiskey club as well. And then I remember when I came to Canada, I've been back and forth over 10 or 11 years now. And I applied for a job for an events company, and I went onto Kijiji and then just typed in whiskey, hoping that maybe something came up. And there was an event company who were hiring to do sampling for LCBO staff members from Black Bottle Whiskey, it was. And that was my dad's favorite whiskey. I'm like, I think I can talk about this. And I impressed the person who hired me on that day and said, you're actually pretty good at this. I'm like, am I? I'm good at something. And then from there, he and his partner at the time, they were introducing me to people in the industry. And I made really good friends with Bev Havers, absolute whiskey legend in Canada. She said, yeah, like you've got something here. And I had no idea. Like I was actually good at anything to go through whiskey. And then from there, eventually a job came up, and it was Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. And I didn't have a work visa at the time. The candidate, I think they were going to hire, something fell through with their work visa. By the time I got mine, they were still looking. And I think I was 5th choice at the end of it. Yeah. And eventually I got the job. But I was never hired as a bartender. I was never hired as a marketing person. The one thing that everyone said is like, this is this guy's thing. This is the one thing that he knows about. It's maybe the only thing he knows about in the world, but this is his thing.
Yeah.
So, it's great. Yeah.
That's amazing. How does it feel to be the one?
I think that the company have got a lot of patience with me. They've actually, I think they know that they've got someone that's kind of in it for life, because it's all I can do. And they were saying like after the first year, so whereabouts do you want to go in the company? I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere. This is it. Like, and it's working for a massive company. They're saying, no, but you have this role and this role. I'm like, no, brand ambassador is me. Like, this is this thing I was made to do. Yeah. And it's really cool though. Like, it's I learned so much from the people who I get to interact with. Like, still, like I've never called myself an expert at all. But the one thing that's pretty cool is that, I think I'm quite open-minded about whiskey. And I can talk to people from different people that are new to whiskey, or people who absolutely are nerds. And I don't think I'm too opinionated, which maybe makes it a little bit boring for some people, but really, I'm just really open-minded about the whole whiskey world, and people seem to appreciate that.
Yeah. That is that gives people like us hope.
Yeah.
People that love whiskey and would love for that to translate into something that also, becomes a career or whatever. That is super encouraging. But it's also, I think it's probably more, like you said, it's probably more the exception than the rule by any means.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say the one thing I would say that I definitely could speak confidently about when I was doing my interviews was I worked at a liquor store in Glasgow. It's called the Good Spirits Company. And I worked with some of the most amazing minds in Scotch whiskey, because they can understand the business side of it a lot more, I think, than necessarily a lot of liquor stores who you would go into, especially in Canada, where there's like more like provincial liquor boards you're working with. And it was really fascinating to listen to their opinions on it, because they themselves, in terms of that good whiskey and bad whiskey, well, they're actually buying the stuff and they have to sell it to make money. So they've got like shelter over their head. And when it came to anything in the industry that they said, you know what, this isn't a great thing that's going to be happening, hearing that kind of perspective from a business perspective was really, really cool, because not everyone gets an insight there. And getting to learn from amazing people that were working there. And I think it's just that idea of, here's what behind the scenes people think about these whiskies. Here's behind the scenes in terms of like some of the drama that's going on at one distillery. Here's some of the little secrets that they don't tell you, but they themselves have found a way in to sort of hear about these things. And also as well, maybe like projecting what's going to be happening in Scotland in terms of the whiskey industry. And a lot of the things that I've learned from there has been pretty cool. And I think that's one of the things that I've got as an insight, I think, is like how, not necessarily just like selling a bottle, because that's like quite relatively easy, but in terms of actually what the category is going to be and what the industry is going to be in 5 or 10 years, I think having my ear to the ground there is something that maybe not everyone does have.
No, that's great. And where do you think what do you think about the whiskey, especially Scotch industry? Like right now, bourbon is like wild. Bourbon's like a cult, but Scotch is pretty close. What do you think? You get all kinds of people that you get the side of people that are, whining and griping about the fact that, their bottles of whatever they were buying before now are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times the price they paid. But then you get the other side of all these new influx of consumers that they didn't know any different anyway. They're just buying it at what it is now. Like what is your analysis of where the market is, especially like in regards to Scotch right now, and like where do you see it going? Because some people are optimistic, thinking it's going to keep going. Some people are pessimistic and think it's going to burst, right? Like it's a bubble or whatever.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the 1980s, when you had like the whiskey flood or whiskey lock, that's a really worrying time, and it's the reason why a lot of distilleries didn't expand. In the 1990s, when things are getting better, and some distilleries still haven't expanded, like still with a little bit of the fear of maybe what happened in the 80s. Can it happen again? It can 100% happen again. There's a lot of reasons why that could happen again, and part of it, though, I think it's really good again is that we still have that market quality. If it's a single malt, there's certain rules that makes it whiskey a little bit boring for some of these very creative minds. But I think there's some of the distilleries themselves are pushing out the boat. I think for Scotch whiskey in general. I don't know if you know the distillery Ardbeg, but they released an absolutely wonderful rye whiskey. And to have like a Scottish rye whiskey is very unusual. And it's been used in the past as some components of grain whiskey. But Ardbeg released this, and it's just like, well, that could be its own category right there. And it's still very strict in terms of how you can make it, but that's a Scottish rye. And now there's other distilleries, I think, that are thinking about that idea. Us at Glenmorangie, we just opened an experimental distillery called the Lighthouse. And the apparatus at the Lighthouse allows you to create a spirit from all sorts of different things, be that sugarcane, be that molasses, be that different grains like rye, even rice. And I think distilleries now, at this moment in time, the bigger distilleries are taking a little bit of inspiration from those smaller craft distilleries. How can the smaller craft distilleries stand out? Well, is there a possibility that we ourselves can also set ourselves up for the future, that we're going to be ready for that as well? For single malt, I think if the consistency is there, that realistically, there's a good chance that the industry will always be strong. And I say consistency or quality, I think it's always going to be strong. I think as soon as you start loosening up some of the rules and regulations about it, you can maybe sell a few bottles maybe 1 year more than what you did before because of curiosity. Yeah. But talking to Dr. Bill Lumsden, our head of whiskey creation, some of the things that he tried out, like maybe like a decade ago, which were those wild ideas, he thought to a T, these are going to work. And then they tried them, so this is revolting. Like, we can't release this, and that's part of the experimentation. But I think you do need the rules in place. It's like it has to have a certain quality standpoint. The one thing I would say, though, just on top of that, though, the one thing that's a little bit worrying for me is maybe towards the secondary market. I think it's a lot of focus on that. I don't want to. I'm 100% not disparaging this brand because I absolutely love them, but I know that there's a certain distillery that's going through a little bit of a thing here because they're not a high production facility. The distillery itself's got a big cult following, and they themselves are selling bottles off the shelf very reasonably. But on the auction, there was a recent auction in Scotland, and a £55 bottle of the core range product was selling for £180 on auction, and that's a core range product. And I think there's something in the secondary market that's annoying people, but I have to say, maybe not every distillery can be at fault on that. I think the secondary market's a different monster.
Oh yeah, I don't think well, if you ever listen to a Ralphie rant, you know very clearly who the bad guy is. He depicts it very clearly. But yeah, I definitely think the secondary market is pretty crazy. I think there's a lot of concern with consumers around that. But at the same time, like, because we've talked about that a little bit.
We've griped about the people who are really concerned, and just said, like, I think like my stance, I won't speak for us, but I feel like we were both just in agreement, was just like, if you're concerned, don't buy on the secondary market. Like, vote with your dollar.
Yeah.
And if stuff's going up, like, you do not need that whiskey today. Whiskey production will exist in the future in some form. It'll change and it'll go up and it'll go down, but like, you do not need that bottle today, and you certainly do not need to pay that much for it if it's not really worth it. But the more people just say, it sucks, here's my money, I'll pay $500-600 for a pappy, then you're like, well,
say $500 or $600.
Yeah, how much are people paying?
It's like $1,000 or $2,000.
I have no idea. I don't know, because I would never pay $500 for it. I'm certainly not going to pay thousands of dollars for it. Just don't do it. I don't know. I mean, that's my opinion. Yeah. That is an opinion, but I think that I do think that you vote with your dollar.
Yeah. Well,
at the end of the day. So
yeah, I would agree with that. And I think I'm assuming I know what distillery you're talking about, and that's probably Springbank. But I think that the thing about Springbank is that they're not pumping up the market. The people that want their product is pumping up the market. And some people would be even deeper into the conspiracy and thinking actually it's people that are wanting to flip profit that are actually pumping up the market more. So you've got people that are buying, cases of Springbank so that the scarcity exists. But the thing with Springbank is that they're like similar to maybe an Ardbeg or a Glenmorangie, is that they have an identity around their distillery. So they're never going to stop. Like, unless they get bought out or something like that, they're not going to stop doing what they're doing. They're not going to stop producing high quality single malt whiskey. So like Josiah said, you don't need that bottle of Springbank 10 for 200 pounds or whatever it's selling, flipping. You know what I mean? You don't need that right now. Just wait, because they're going to continue to produce that same quality single malt whiskey. And eventually hopefully eventually the secondary market will quiet down, and then you will be able to get it again.
I think if there's anything I would say to anyone listening, like, I understand it's frustrating, but don't take it out on the retail staff. Mm-hmm. I've got a friend of mine, and it's like in Scotland especially, I say the UK as a whole, but obviously Scotland I know a bit better, but there's operations there, and it's just like one person, and it's their shop. And they're taking on these really abusive phone calls because they can't get a bottle of like one of the new first editions from a certain distillery. And it kind of takes away a little bit of the charm of Scotch whiskey, because as you were saying about Jim McEwen, you don't disparage anyone. Like, realistically, we're meant to be looking after each other a little bit in there. And it's frustrating, I understand that. And you don't want to go out there and just have to pay secondary market prices for some of these releases. But at the same time, if you've only got, say, I don't know, let's just imagine 2,000 bottles, maybe 3,000 bottles of a release, you might not get every one of them. And don't take out on the retail staff. Like, I've heard some horrific stories recently where some stores, and even the Good Spirits company who I worked at before, like, they themselves, to sell 12 bottles, they go through more effort and have to go through a lot more stress to sell those 12 bottles than what they do for general consumers. And they're doing it to make sure it's a fair way of doing it.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing I'm maybe not too happy on that regard in terms of how people are treated.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are very, very upset about that. And I think like Canada doesn't have a great system, I don't think, but I think the one thing that they do well in places like Ontario and Nova Scotia is that they try to do this like lottery thing. The issue is that the province controls the liquor board, and like the solution, I think a better solution is just privatize it. But the government's not going to do that. They're making too much money. Like, yeah, right. You're never going to convince them to go backwards on that. But there's not a perfect system when you're dealing with, high quality, like high end products or highly sought after products. But when you get this like lottery system in place, then everybody has a chance, and they're selling them at retail. You could go into the US and try to get your pappy like for $1,500, or you could enter your name into the LCBO lottery and maybe win a chance to buy it at retail price, which is like 100 and whatever, whatever year you're getting. So I think there's no perfect system because the market is just like crazy, and people are looking at it to profit from it, not just to consume it. And so that, like, when you've got a market that's like that, there's not really any perfect solution by any means. But yeah, I would agree with that. You see a lot of people getting mad. Even like I've heard lots of stories, even in Ontario, with people at the LCBO. Like, for example, they did a release like a little while ago of Blue Spot, and it like sold out within hours. And they only allocated a certain amount of bottles in the GTA area and maybe some in Ottawa. And people were losing their mind. Like, I was on Reddit feeds and like they were just losing it and being like, oh, LCBO sucks. Like, this is why Doug Ford is. Anyway, they're just going on, like all these like spirals. And it's like, it's not their fault. They only got allocated a certain amount. And if they put it into a lottery, you would complain because you think it's impossible to win the lottery. But if they put it for general sale at the store, you complain because you can't get there fast enough to get it. So like, what do you want? And that's the issue, is that nobody's going to be satisfied regarding like, there's no perfect solution.
Yeah.
There's an interesting thing is, so I know this is like a little bit behind the scenes knowledge, I know we're recording, but when it comes to allocations, like allocations are a strange one for Canada. For any Scotch whisky company, I'd probably say right across the board, Canada's not the most profitable when it comes to for single malt Scotch whisky. The allocations though of products, like my understanding, I know for ourselves this is true, and a lot of the other brands who are in that kind of bracket of like who a lot of collectors like, the allocations have been going bigger than what they were maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And so the allocation is getting bigger, but I think companies like ourselves and other companies and the actual categories themselves, they've grown so much that demand that's there is something that I think, I can't speak for everyone, but it's a little bit surprising in terms of the actual demand for those bottles. And a lot of people say it wasn't even that long ago, like maybe 5-6 years ago, some of these bottles were going dusty on a shelf. It's not a case of it's been for decades this has been happening. So I can understand the frustration. I know there's a few whiskies out there that I can't get a hold of anymore, that the ones that I fell in love with, like 10 years ago. And I would usually buy like a bottle every year. And it'd be, I'd like to think I was a big supporter of the brand and the distilleries, but I can't get them anymore. And I think that's just part and parcel with it. And it's such a shame because people can't get them. But when there's just that much demand now for, I'm saying in my category for single malt, that is a bit of a shame.
Do you feel that as a Scotsman, do you feel that a little bit living in Canada? Like, man, I mean, I'm sure I don't know what your frequency of travel to and from Scotland is like, but I know you'd be limited even in what you could bring back, I would think. So unless you have special privileges, I don't know, man. I don't know.
I wish. I've got all my whiskeys at my mum and dad's house in Bellsill and just outside Glasgow, probably getting drowned in Diet Coke as we speak.
Oh no.
If it was Coke Zero, I wouldn't mind,
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah. Oh man. But yeah, do you feel that a little bit? Is there an extra sting there, knowing like, hey, there's some great whiskeys that are very accessible somewhere, but I live in Canada?
It's a good question. Scotland at the moment is in a position where even in Scotland, like a lot of demand for those whiskies, it's not any easier. There's like a friend of mine who really knows their bourbon said, I was going down to Kentucky, and he said, that you should never buy bourbon in Kentucky. Like that's where there's not enough of it there when it comes to the special releases. It's the go and find somewhere in the middle of nowhere, find a liquor store with like a flashing sign outside that says sale, and you might find a dusty bottle of, I don't know, like one of the fancy Eagle Rares or something on the shelf. And in Scotland, that's kind of, for a long time, it was the same. But social media has been fantastic in terms of bringing a lot of people together. But the information that's there also means that people share. It's like, hey, this liquor store in the middle of nowhere with the flashing sign, they now have 4 bottles, and then one person goes and then picks it up. It's just part and parcel of what's going on. And in Scotland, there's no difference to that. There's convenience stores. There used to be a convenience store, I think it was in Dufton, and the person that owned it would actually stock up on some of the special releases. And to the extent that there was one of the best whiskey selections was in this small convenience store until people found out about it. And then people go up there, they're raiding through it, trying to get maybe like a whiskey that was maybe bottled like 10 years ago, but still part of the core range, and they're grabbing that one. So I think that everyone's kind of wised up to it. the idea of trying to find whiskies is just as difficult in Scotland than what it is here.
Yeah. Well, and the rate of travel too, like people are traveling all over the world too. So there's not really any place like, cause you're on Reddit and you see like on the Scotch, like communities or whatever, and you see people that are like, hey, I just stopped by the Dominican Republic and the duty free has this, and then all of a sudden it's gone, right? Yeah. Like they have Blanton's there, or they have Weller Full Proof or whatever, and it's like, yeah, everything's just smaller. Like with social media, with travel, like there's no corner unturned at this point, which makes it, interesting. Although here in Canada, Alberta seems like the one spot, because Ontario is pretty crazy, because even as an Ardbeg ambassador, like the allocation of Corey Vrecken is like very minimal. I don't even think you guys have had that for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give you, this is something that I say without complaining. Honestly, I'm not complaining. So when it comes to getting Glenmorangie and Ardbeg special editions, like I don't get them. I don't have any more access than anyone else does. And I'd love them to send me a bottle of everything, of course. But the time when Ardbeg Drum came out, and it was around the same time as the first batch of the Tri-Van, Ardbeg 19 years old, I was at the New Brunswick Whiskey Show, and they have a store on site. And I was the first person getting served as the store opened to buy Ardbeg. And I worked for the company. And you're saying things like Corey Vrecken and things like that. So what happened with Ardbeg is the lottery system that you spoke about earlier on. So it's not just special editions that go in that. Sometimes it's actually core range products. So the last time that the Anno, Ugadal, and Corey Vrecken were at the LCBO, they were in the lottery system, and they sold out in the lottery. So, but it's an interesting one when it comes to that. Is like that's maybe where there's a little bit of work definitely needing done. Is maybe towards communicating that these are products that are not necessarily meant to be bought in the case. And obviously our bosses would love us to do that, sell Corey Vrecken by the case. But realistically, they're meant to be on the shelf and for people who have maybe not experienced it before to pick up a bottle.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is. Like I guess it's a good and bad problem, in the sense that like it's a good problem that the demand is there for it, but it's bad in the sense also that like it makes it, like you said, that people become frustrated because they're like, 2 years ago, I could have just gone in and there would have been 30 on the shelf and I could have just grabbed one or two. But now I have to put my name in a lottery or whatever for it. Or like I have to travel to New Brunswick. Like when I go and visit my family in New Brunswick, that's when I buy my Corey Vrecken or whatever it is. You know what I mean? So
yeah, we don't have any Corey Vrecken in Nova Scotia.
No, we don't.
None.
Yeah, don't even
look. Don't bother.
Here. Save your time. Go to Alberta.
Yeah.
I think a good thing, one thing I will say, and again, this is not just me just trying to be nice and things like that. The one thing I would say is, if there's certain whiskies out there, not just like Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, obviously it's my job, buy lots of Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. But if it comes to some of the whiskies that maybe you've got a certain budget, you're buying a whiskey for a certain reason, so maybe a certain occasion, there's a lot of good whiskies out there. And I think that maybe it's a little bit more difficult when you're right in the store at that time to figure out what to buy. But there's a good chance you actually might find something that maybe it is like a bit left field from what you were expecting. You might actually be quite surprised by it. But I can say for single malt, like realistically, within reason, you're probably not going to be too disappointed.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. When we started the podcast, which was just in January of this year, and we started out with Lagavulin 16, like episode 1. And we kind of thought that was a good first episode based on the prestige of that whiskey, just that it's, revered, respected. Everybody likes it. Even people that aren't very deep down into the wormhole of whiskey, they maybe aren't even an enthusiast, might have some familiarity with this and with this name, Lagavulin. So we got started there, and we were deep enough at that point that I think we weren't too susceptible to the brand bias, and we have been a little rough on Lagavulin. We only recently just kind of like maybe corrected a little bit of like our harshness toward the Lagavulin 16 specifically. But
that's such an obscure one to like go hard on as well, because it's such a lovely whiskey.
I know, it's a great whiskey. It was Well, you know what? You can, if you're listening to the podcast, listen to our very first episode and then listen to
the
episode number,
whichever is coming out like tomorrow.
16.
The
one on brand bias.
Yeah, brand bias.
Yeah, episode number 16.
It's actually we're drinking Ardbeg 10 on that one.
On that one, yes. Yeah. So listen to that episode because we kind of correct a little bit of like
we course correct.
A bit. We kind of explain in detail kind of what we're responding to with maybe my aggression.
Well, and half of it became a joke. And then when you're joking about something, you bring it back up and then it becomes a bigger deal than it is. But
anyway. Yeah. But I don't actually remember why what I was going to say. But I can tell you how I kind of want to end is with a big question. And then we'll maybe do like a little rapid fire. Sure. But big question is this, and it's a question you invented. I know you didn't invent it. I don't know where you got it from, but I
invented it.
He usually asks this to guests and I love it. And I'm probably going to say it wrong, but what is one thing you always want to be asked to talk about, but you never get to really talk about?
Wrestling.
Okay. In the world of whiskey, what is one thing? Yeah.
That's a good question. I think I've been really good. I've been very honored. I've had an opportunity to talk about quite a lot of different things that are quite geeky and nerdy. But something I maybe don't do enough is the idea of maybe talking about the real nerdy scientific side of peat and peated whiskey in general. It's a fascinating subject, but at the same time it's interesting. You don't have enough time really in front of people to really do that, and then afterwards maybe not everyone as much as they might think they were interested initially. Maybe it comes a bit more like a science lecture than actually a bit of fun.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask you this question. What do you think about Canadian whiskey? Like you're a Scotsman in Canada, repping, a single malt Scotch. What do you think about Canadian whiskey? And do you think that there would be, because I don't know, this isn't accurate, but because there could be people out there or distilleries out there that are doing this, but I think most peated Canadian whiskey is not Canadian peated. I think a lot of the time they're sourcing their barley from outside of Canada or whatever they might be using. But yeah, I'd like to know what you think of Canadian whiskey and what you think, it could maybe where it could go. What are some cool things you're seeing? What are some things that maybe you think they need to do? Something like that.
Yeah. I probably say that it's interesting when it comes to Canadian whiskey because the category of Canadian whiskey has almost, in my opinion, got a little bit more narrow in terms of the categories as opposed to being Canadian whiskey in general. And I think that's quite a good thing because I think it's a bit easier for people to kind of find what their palate is. So having Canadian single malt, which is single malt now, Canadian rye whiskey, I know that there is 100% rye whiskies from Canada now, and that's maybe where the focus is. So things like Alberta Premium, as you were mentioned before this, things like that I think are good because it gets a lot of people on board with a category within a category, and as opposed to the idea of maybe trying 3 different Canadian whiskies with different grains and coming out of it, I've still having no idea if you like Canadian whiskey or not. So I think there's a lot of potential in the subcategories, and the bigger they grow, that they can make a mark outside of Canada. The idea of Canadian single malts, especially, I've tried a few now. I don't want to single out anyone specifically, but I am holding a Shelter Point glass in my hand. All Clear from Alberta is amazing as well. And just as a couple, there's an awful lot of single malt being made. And those are the ones I'd probably say in the UK was a bit of a fascination about, because we've seen how different countries can do it. And I think those are definitely, if they're not well enough to hang around with those more established markets already, I think they're definitely on their way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So maybe not this idea of Canadian whiskey in terms of like, here's a Canadian whiskey, and you don't really necessarily know what's inside that. I think that can sometimes be a bit disparaging on a global scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a good point that I haven't heard before brought up, the categories and how it kind of breaks down. Because I certainly I hated rye at first. when I started getting into Canadian whiskey, then into Canadian 100% rye whiskeys, all of a sudden I was like, I am loving what I'm tasting. I am loving the flavors that I'm getting into here.
Mm-hmm.
Game changer for me. And we'll be talking about that and more in further episodes. And yeah, same thing. We recently were talking about off the podcast, talking about Canadian single malts and kind of the outcry maybe, or the interest in that, and what that could do for better or for worse. And we'll probably have to just save that conversation. We talked a lot about that.
Yeah, we did.
But yeah. All right. Did you have anything else? Bigger question?
I don't think so.
Okay. Then let's do this. Desert Island bottle. Desert Island, you're stranded. You get one bottle. What are you going to take with you?
Ugadal.
Okay.
Desert Island, not a bottle that you are an ambassador for.
Well, let's do this. Let's make it easy for you. Desert Island, not Scotch.
Okay, not Scotch.
Not single malt.
I'm happy to talk about Scotch whiskey. I'll probably say Long Row non-age statement is probably my Desert Island one.
We just drank that the other night.
Yeah, very good.
As much as there's more obscure bottles out there, the Long Row non-age statement is one I'd be quite happy to sit down and maybe get some fresh seafood out the sea.
Yeah. If you had to do a Desert Island Canadian, what would you take?
That's a bit more difficult. I talk about Shelter Point all the time, so I'm probably going to say one of the Shelter Point series, and they have their Smoke Point series, which is where we actually have unpeated whiskey finished in a barrel from Islay.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that.
No,
that's cool.
We don't get any of that stuff.
No, we don't. No.
It's a real bummer.
Yeah, all of those big ones that everybody's really excited about right now, like Two Brewers and Shelter Point and Eau Claire and Macaloni's and et cetera. We don't get any of that stuff. So it's really awesome.
Doesn't mean we can't get a hold of it. It just means that it's just not coming here. We need to explore more creative means of sourcing these bottles. Mm-hmm. This is really sad though. Because it is sad. We are Canadian. We live in Canada. Yeah. Do you have any quick questions?
Quick questions.
You were really quick, by the way. I didn't see that coming. I thought I'd have some time to formulate.
Yeah, I know some other to rattle off some other fast questions.
Yeah.
What's your favorite city in Canada?
Halifax.
Really? Are you serious, or are you just saying that because we're from Halifax?
No, I shouldn't probably say that because it means it seems that I don't like Toronto. Toronto has welcomed me so much, and I've got so much I love about Toronto. And my day-to-day living is stress-free when I walk outside, and there's no complaints here at all. But the first time I went to Halifax, I fell in love after about half an hour. It's the most Canadian city in terms of what people outside of Canada think of Canada being nice. I think it is everyone you meet is so supportive of each other in terms of what I've seen in my experience, at least anyway. And every place is allowed to have its own charm. No one necessarily feels they have to try and fit in. So there's a lot of individuality as well. But no, Halifax is I think a lot of people know this already, but it's a good chance me and my wife will live in Halifax one day.
Hooray!
Oh, yeah.
Well, me and my wife. Well, my wife's struggling to get on board as an American. I had to get her to come here first. She already left her home country, and I want to move to Scotland, and I've never even been there. But I'm just like, I just want to live there. I just do.
Also, as well, the last time I was there, I have to say, we got surprised when we went to Split Crow in Halifax, and we found out what Power Hour is.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
They have this hour on a Saturday and maybe on a Thursday as well. You'll have your listeners coming in and giving you the details and the address. But they have this promotion for beer and live music, and certain everything on paper. I'm like that. I don't think this is necessarily my thing. It seems a bit rowdy, and as much as I do like live music, and we got there and everyone was just interacting with each other, it was everyone knew each other and things like that. And having somewhere it could have been in Toronto, that'd be a bit sketchy. Everyone was just encouraging everyone to have a good time, and it seems really weird, but it's a lot of fun. And me and my wife were expecting to be there for maybe half an hour in and out, and we were there for about an hour and a half. So yeah. So anyway, if any listeners have ever been to Power Hour, maybe they can share their thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we get a little bit more info on that. Have you heard of that?
No,
we're very uncool. Very uncool.
We just sit in Josiah's basement and drink whiskey all day.
Maybe it's just for the tourists. Maybe it's just as like, oh yeah, go here. It's where we send the tourists.
There you go.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm sure it's some like there's all kinds of little things about Halifax that we're discovering more and more. So yeah, I'm sure it's something.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I love this city. I think if I ever leave Halifax, I'll probably be leaving Canada because to me, I have no reason to go to anywhere else in this country. So
yeah,
unless I get a sweet job or something, but this is where I am today. That's really cool. I'm really surprised to hear you say that. I mean, I do like Halifax, but I do feel like it's largely overlooked because of its size. From people from Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, so on and so forth.
Well, the key about the thing, like everybody from Toronto, well, not everybody, but most people from Toronto love Toronto, but everybody that's not from Toronto hates Toronto.
I remember I was at the Banff Whiskey Festival one time, and I've got lots of terrible jokes. You've heard me present. I've got lots of terrible jokes.
No, they're great.
I used to start off all my presentations with, as you can tell by the accent, I'm not from these parts. I'm from Toronto. And I did this in Banff, and they booed. And like people were like, "Oh my god, the big slicker from Toronto's here." I'm joking. Like, yeah. So I'm like, okay, yeah. People really don't like Toronto outside of Toronto, do they?
Yeah. No. Hey, I don't mind it. I like it. Yeah. Anything else, Tyler, from you?
I don't think so.
There's so many little questions that I can't think of right now. And
our rapid questions were very slow and very little.
Yep. Sorry about that, Bry. But let's bring this to a close. We will have you on in the near future, I believe, because we are a little ahead of recording from when we're releasing, but and we're really excited for that. But thanks for joining us today. You are so fun to hang out with.
No one's ever said that before. No one's ever said that. Maybe just people from the East Coast.
Yeah.
No, man. No, I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure people say it. And if they don't, maybe they're just not saying it. But I'm sure they think it. You're so fun to hang out with. I feel like it just feels easy to talk and drink and talk whiskey. And hey, what's better than that?
Yeah. Totally.
So yeah, thanks so much for hanging out and being on the pod.
Thanks so much for having me. Hopefully we'll do this in person next time in Halifax, my favorite city.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
We'd like that.
Yeah. Right on. Well,
all right.
Cheers. Talk to you later.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye-bye.